Ethan and Clara never believed in the stories about the old apartment on Hawthorne Street until the night they realized it wasn't just the building that was haunted, but something living inside their own reflections. I moved into the apartment late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the city skyline. The building looked old, a little worn, with paint peeling around the edges and a faint smell of mildew wafting from the lobby. I didn't care. The rent was cheap, the location convenient, and I needed a fresh start after months of bouncing between cramped sublets. I carried my boxes up the narrow staircase, the wood groaning under each step. By the time I reached the door to my new place, my hands were sore and sweat ran down my back, but I felt a strange thrill. It was a clean slate, maybe even exciting. The apartment itself was small, a single bedroom, a bathroom that smelled faintly of old disinfectant, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The walls were off-white, scuffed in several places, and the carpet had a faded, dull pattern that made it hard to imagine it ever being truly clean. But the moment I set down my boxes and looked around, I felt a tiny pulse of comfort. This was mine. Finally, a place of my own. That first night, I unpacked slowly, placing books on the shelves, stacking dishes in the cabinets, and carefully folding clothes into the drawers. Everything seemed normal maybe. The floorboards creaked as I walked, and the faint hum of the heater echoed in the empty apartment. But I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings creak. Pipes make noise. It was just me adjusting to a new space. I showered, changed into pajamas, and lay down in the unfamiliar bed. The sheets were scratchy, the mattress too soft, but I managed to close my eyes. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. Shadows seemed to linger in the corners of the room longer than they should. Every time I blinked, the shapes seemed to twitch, as though they had a life of their own. I shook my head, blaming my imagination. I had been stressed, moving all day, exhausted. Shadows aren't alive. Still, sleep didn't come easy. Every few minutes I thought I heard something soft footsteps across the floor, a faint scratching near the door. I told myself it was the wind, or the building settling. But then I noticed the door. I was sure I had locked it before getting into bed, but it was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened. My hand trembled as I reached to close it. The lock clicked, and I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was just too tired to remember. That night was a long blur of half-sleep and anxious glances. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I saw something moving just out of the corner of my vision. I tried to convince myself it was my mind playing tricks. After all, I had never lived alone before. Maybe this was normal. The next morning I found something under the door. At first I thought it was a piece of trash, blown in by the wind. But when I picked it up, my blood ran cold. It was a note. I didn't recognize the handwriting. Jagged, uneven, almost frantic. And the words were simple, chilling. You shouldn't be here. My hand shook as I crumpled the note in my fingers. I felt a rising panic, a cold weight pressing on my chest. I stuffed it into the trash, trying to convince myself it was a joke, maybe a prank by some neighbor. But even as I threw the paper away, I felt eyes on me, heavy, relentless. Days passed, and the unease only grew. The shadows seemed darker, heavier, clinging to the corners of the apartment. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of something in the mirror that didn't belong to me. Just a flash, a twisted shape, disappearing the moment I turned fully to look. I tried not to dwell on it, but the sense of being watched never left. Then came the night when I saw the face. I had woken up to a strange noise, soft dragging like fingernails against the wooden floor. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the window. I turned toward the bathroom mirror, and there it was. Not my reflection, something else, pale, twisted, staring at me with eyes I didn't recognize, lips curled into a smile that wasn't mine. I blinked, the face vanished, but my heart continued to race. I realized then that the apartment wasn't just empty, it wasn't just old or worn. Something was here, something patient, something waiting, and for the first time, I understood that my move, what I thought was a new beginning, might have been a terrible mistake. I couldn't stop staring at the mirrors after that night. I avoided them, covered some with cloth, turned others away, but I knew whatever was here, it was watching, learning, and it was only the beginning. After the first night, I stopped sleeping in my bed. I moved to the couch in the living room, leaving the lights on, even during the day. Every corner of the apartment felt alive, though nothing moved when I looked directly. The creaks of the floorboards were louder now, deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing just beyond my sight. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I tried to distract myself with books, television, even my phone, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. It started with small things. Objects shifted slightly when I wasn't looking. A coffee mug would be on the kitchen counter one moment, the next on the floor. Books fell off shelves even though the shelves were empty, or so I thought. Keys appeared in odd places. One morning I found mine sitting in the freezer. I stared at them for so long I almost couldn't breathe. The apartment, once my sanctuary, had become a trap. I tried recording the apartment with my phone, hoping to catch something tangible. something I could show someone to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The first recordings showed nothing, just the empty apartment, silent, still. But at night, reviewing the footage became a ritual I couldn't resist. That's when I noticed movement, shadows, stretching across the walls, moving slowly, deliberately, not random flickers from the light. They moved with purpose. I paused the video, froze the frame, my stomach churned. The shadow was standing near my couch, watching me even when I wasn't there. I stopped going outside. The city beyond my window seemed distant, a life I no longer belonged to. Even when I forced myself to leave for groceries or work, I felt eyes on me. People looked, of course, but there was something else, something that didn't belong in the daylight, a sense that someone had followed me inside, unseen, hiding in the space just beyond my vision. That night, the sound came, soft, wet breathing, right next to my ear. I had the blanket pulled over my head, trembling, convinced I would wake up to an empty room, but the sound didn't leave. It grew louder, closer, pressing into my skin, and for the first time I felt true, unshakable terror. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My eyes were wide in the dark, staring at nothing. The apartment was still, too still, and then, a whisper, almost inaudible, barely a breath. "I see you." I bolted upright, the blanket falling round me. The room was empty. Nothing had moved except for the condensation on the bathroom mirror, fogged from my earlier attempt to wash away the tension of the day. Trembling, I approached it. And there it was, writing scratched into the fog, letters formed by something wet and uneven. "I see you." I wiped it away frantically, my hands slick with condensation. The mirror cracked at the edge, a single jagged line running down the center. I stumbled back, my chest heaving. Something about the line made me feel watched. I could swear I saw movement in the reflection, something crouching just beyond the broken shard. My reflection blinked, and then, for a brief second, it wasn't me. I stopped using mirrors entirely. I avoided reflective surfaces whenever possible, covering them with towels, turning them toward walls. Yet the sense of presence remained. I could feel it when I moved, lurking behind corners, following me silently. The apartment itself had changed. It had become a place of waiting, a living, breathing entity with a mind of its own. Sleep became a distant memory. Days blended together. I barely ate, barely left the apartment. The fear had settled into my bones, a constant ache I couldn't shake, and the shadows grew bolder. They lingered longer, stretching further across the walls, as if testing the limits of their power over me. I felt myself shrinking, retreating into the couch, trying not to provoke whatever waited in the darkness. One morning, I woke to find the apartment rearranged. The couch was in the corner, the TV turned to static, and a single note rested on the floor where my pillow had been. I didn't touch it at first. Something inside me warned me it was dangerous, but I had no choice. My hands shook as I picked it up. The words were written in the same jagged, frantic style as before. "You can't hide. I am everywhere." I dropped it. My stomach turned, my heart raced. I didn't know what I feared more, the note, or the undeniable truth that someone or something was inside the apartment with me. And then I realized, with a terror that made me want to scream, that the shadows didn't just linger in the corners anymore. They lingered in the edges of my vision, at the edge of mirrors, even in the black space beneath the furniture. They were watching, waiting, learning, and I understood, in the marrow of my bones, that I was no longer alone. By the time Chapter 3 begins, I had stopped trying to leave the apartment altogether. The streets outside no longer felt safe. Every time I stepped beyond my door, the city seemed twisted, wrong in subtle ways, lights too dim, shadows too sharp, faces in the crowd that lingered too long. I realized it wasn't just the apartment anymore. Whatever had found me, it followed me. It had learned the shape of my life and slipped into it like a shadow with teeth. Inside, I barely moved. I stayed on the couch, watching the corners, watching the mirrors, watching the empty hallway. I kept my phone close, recording everything I could. My rational mind demanded proof. If I could see it, maybe I could understand it. Maybe I could fight it. But the more I watched, the less I understood. At first, the recordings were empty. Nothing but the stale apartment, the faint hum of the heater, and the occasional flicker of the streetlights outside. But then I noticed something strange. Each night a shadow would appear, not random flickers or odd shapes, but a distinct figure, stretched tall and thin, moving slowly across the room. It never entered the frame fully, never revealed a face, but its presence was undeniable. I began to recognize patterns. The shadow didn't just drift aimlessly, it watched me, lingering near the couch when I moved, hovering by the doorway when I left for the bathroom. It seemed patient, almost calculating, like it was learning how I moved, how I slept, how I thought. The more I observed it, the more I felt myself shrinking inside my own apartment, losing space, losing freedom, losing myself. One night, I woke to the faint sound of scraping, low, deliberate, like fingernails against wood. It came from the hallway outside my living room. My body went rigid. My hands gripped the blanket as if it could anchor me to safety. I didn't dare move. The sound grew louder, closer, and then stopped. Silence. I held my breath waiting, but nothing happened. I tried to convince myself it was a neighbor, a rat, anything but what I feared. But then I remembered the note, the jagged handwriting, the simple words, "You can't hide, I am everywhere." And I realized, with a cold certainty, that whatever was in my apartment didn't follow normal rules. It could be everywhere at once, and nowhere. It could appear in a shadow, in a mirror, or just out of the corner of my eye. I started reviewing the footage obsessively, frame by frame, and then I saw it. Not a shadow this time, but something more tangible, or at least more horrifying. Behind me, reflected in the corner of the frame, a face appeared, pale, distorted eyes too dark, and lips twisted into a grin that I did not recognize. My breath caught in my throat. My own reflection in the camera wasn't me, and it moved independently, reaching toward me, just at the edge of the frame. I tried to look away, but my eyes were glued to the screen. The next morning I walked into the living room and froze. There, pressed into the condensation on the window, was a single small handprint, too small to be mine. I staggered back, my mind spinning. My window faced the 5th floor. No one could have climbed up here, and yet, the handprint was real. Wet, sharp, undeniable. It left me paralyzed with fear. I stopped eating, I stopped moving, I barely slept. Every sound was amplified. The hum of the heater, the ticking of a clock, the faint creak of the floorboards. Every shadow seemed to twitch, elongate, curl into shapes I couldn't name. I felt watched, studied, hunted. And the apartment felt like it had changed around me. The walls leaned closer, the corners darkened, the ceilings seemed higher. I realized something terrifying. This thing wasn't just a presence. It was adapting. It was learning me, watching me, becoming me, in some distorted, monstrous way. And I had no idea how long it had been here. Days, weeks, months. Time no longer seemed linear. I existed in a loop of fear, trapped in a place that was no longer mine. Then came the whisper, low, wet, right next to my ear, despite no one being there. "You're mine now." My blood ran cold. The sound echoed in my skull. My hands shook. I tried to stand, to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. The room stretched, shadows crawling toward me, walls bending in impossible ways. And in the corner of the living room, I saw it. Not fully, just the edge of a face in a mirror. Pale, grinning, familiar, and not mine. And I knew, with certainty that made me want to scream until my lungs tore. It was inside me, waiting, learning, patient. I stopped trying to rationalize the apartment long ago. The shadows, the whispers, the shifting objects, it had become impossible to separate reality from hallucination. Even during the day, I could feel it. Something unseen watched from the corners, from the ceiling, from inside the mirrors. I avoided all reflective surfaces, but still, the sense of eyes tracking me never left. I had become a prisoner in my own home, terrified to move, terrified to breathe too loudly. Then the door appeared. I didn't notice it at first. One night, as I shuffled through the living room, trying to make sense of the growing chaos, I realized there was a door in the corner I had never seen before. Old, wooden, peeling paint, heavy, with a lock that looked rusted and ancient. I was sure it hadn't been there before. My first instinct was to avoid it, but curiosity, the kind that comes from desperation, overpowered my fear. I reached for the handle. Cold metal pressed against my palm. I twisted it. Locked. I tried again. Locked. Scratches ran across the surface of the door, jagged and deep, as though something on the other side had been trying to escape or trying to get in. My heart hammered. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, but I couldn't stop looking at it. Every night I found myself drawn back to it, compelled by a force I couldn't explain. The apartment had become a maze, the walls stretching and bending in ways that made no sense, and that door, it was the only anomaly, the only constant in the shifting madness. I dreamed about it. In the dream I opened the door and stepped into a room identical to my own. Everything was the same, my couch, my TV, the scattered books, but it was drenched in a thick, dark red substance, smeared across the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and in the corner, a figure rocked back and forth, whispering words I could not understand. Its face was obscured by shadows, but the intent was clear. I woke up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat. My apartment was silent, as if the dream had never happened. But when I looked around, I noticed the scratches, not on the door this time, but on my walls. Faint, claw-like marks that hadn't been there before. The whispers started again, louder now, echoing from the corners, from the walls, even behind closed doors. I didn't dare move. My life had shrunk to a small sphere around the couch, my sanctuary, my cage. Every time I tried to leave, the apartment seemed to rearrange itself. Hallways stretched impossibly long, corners twisted at angles that made no sense. Doors appeared where there had never been doors before. The air itself felt thick, heavy, suffocating, as though the apartment was closing in around me. I tried to record everything, every sound, every shadow, but the recordings showed nothing. The camera captured the empty apartment, ordinary in every way. The whispers, the scratches, the presence, none of it appeared on film. It was as if whatever it was, it existed outside of normal reality, invisible to anyone else, confined to my perception alone. And yet I could feel it, always. watching, learning, waiting. Then the night came when I saw it clearly. The mirror in the living room, which I had avoided for weeks, reflected movement I couldn't ignore. I froze, staring at the reflection. It wasn't me. Not entirely. The figure moved independently, stretching its neck, tilting its head, smiling with a twisted grin that chilled me to the bone. Its eyes so like mine, yet wrong, stared directly at me, piercing through the distance between the glass and my soul. I couldn't turn away. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped, rooted to the spot by terror so pure it burned in my chest. The figure in the mirror raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. My heart leaped as I realized the handprint it left was wet, real, and slowly sliding down the reflective surface. My own hand, trembling, reached toward it, but the instant I touched the glass, a jolt of cold ran through my body. It wasn't a reflection anymore. Something inside me shifted. Something had changed. And then I heard it, the whisper, clear and close, soon. I backed away, stumbling over the couch. The apartment had grown darker, corners stretching into shadows that pulsed like living things. The door in the corner, the one I had been drawn to, now seemed to throb with a presence of its own, scratches deepening, as if something on the other side was growing impatient. My stomach turned, my mind screamed to escape, but I had no idea where I could go. The apartment had become a labyrinth, and the figure in the mirrors had learned the shape of my fear. I realized then, with a terror that made me want to collapse, that the apartment itself wasn't haunted. Whatever had been watching me, learning me, wasn't content to linger. It wanted to replace me. And the door in the corner, it was only the beginning. By the time I reached what felt like the end of my endurance, I had stopped trying to leave. Every attempt to step outside was met with twisted hallways, doors leading nowhere, and mirrors reflecting not the world, but me, some version of me I did not recognize. The apartment had become alive, its walls breathing, stretching, closing in. I realized then that I was no longer just living here. I was being trapped, observed, studied, and remade. Mirrors were everywhere now. I could not avoid them. Even the refrigerator door reflected me, distorted, elongated, a shadow of myself that moved differently. I saw the figure again, clearer this time. Its face was pale, eyes black, yet eerily familiar, almost as if it had molded itself from fragments of my own features. It smiled at me, a slow, deliberate grin that filled me with panic and disgust. My reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, leaving a wet imprint identical to the one I had seen weeks before on the window. I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that I had been observed from the start, carefully, methodically. This thing, this presence, had learned me. Every twitch of an eye, every breath, every step I had taken within these walls had been catalogued. And now, it was ready. I tried to hide, curled into the corner of the living room, eyes fixed on the largest mirror in the apartment. It stared back, unmoving, patient, and then the reflection shifted, not like a reflection anymore. Its movements were independent, deliberate, confident. It stepped closer, each motion slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment before the final act. I tried to look away, tried to shut my eyes, but my body refused. I was rooted by a terror I could not fight. The whisper came again, closer than ever, echoing in my mind rather than in the room. It's time. My pulse slammed against my ribs. My reflection raised its hand again. I flinched instinctively, and the moment my fingers brushed the glass, the room seemed to shiver. The walls bent slightly inward, and for a fleeting second, the world went still, as if suspended in a nightmare. And then I understood. This thing was not outside me, it was inside. It had been inside all along. I felt it, a cold, invasive presence, creeping through my thoughts, pressing against my mind. The reflection was no longer merely mimicking me, it was replacing me. Every twitch, every breath, every flicker of fear it had observed for weeks had been rehearsed, replicated. And now, I was trapped in the wrong body, in the wrong space, while it assumed mine. I stumbled back, crashing into furniture, desperate to escape, but the apartment would not allow it. Doors led to walls. Hallways twisted endlessly. Mirrors reflected me endlessly, taunting me. I ran blindly, heart hammering, and finally reached the living room. The largest mirror dominated the space. My reflection smiled fully now. My own face reached out, pressed against the glass, and whispered words I could not speak, words that burned into my skull. "You're next." I realized then that I had become the hunted, the specimen, the prey. The apartment was not just a place. It was a conduit, a trap, a mechanism to replace its inhabitants. And the thing in the mirror, my mirror, was patient, eternal, indifferent to my panic, indifferent to my screams that echoed unheard in the suffocating space. I fell to the floor, shaking uncontrollably, watching as my reflection moved freely, stepping closer to the room, closer to my life, closer to the world outside. I tried to resist, tried to fight, but my limbs refused. My mind screamed, but the scream dissolved into the endless static of whispers and shadows that surrounded me. Then, silence. The apartment shifted. The mirrors reflected nothing but darkness. I felt my body grow colder, lighter, as though I were fading. slipping into nothing. And the last thing I saw before my vision went black was my own reflection, now fully alive, stepping out of the mirror, into my life, wearing my face, grinning at the world with my eyes, my features, my very self. The next day someone would move in. They would smile at the cheap rent, the creaking floors, the faint smell of mildew. And somewhere, behind the reflective surfaces, waiting patiently, I would watch them, trapped in a hollow version of myself, as the apartment learned again. And when the time was right, it would begin anew. The apartment never forgets, and neither does the thing in the mirror.